Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very special guest coming right up. Our guest today is Dr. Warren-Farrell, and he's here to talk to us about his new book, The Boy Crisis. Now, Dr. Warren has been chosen by Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. He's also been selected by the Center for World Spirituality in 2011 as one of the world's spiritual leaders. His books have been published in over 50 countries and in 15 languages. They include 2 top award-winning books that are international bestsellers titled Why Men Are the Way They Are and The Myth of Male Power. So today, Dr. Farrell's here to talk to us about his new book, The Boy Crisis. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Warren-Farrell.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here, and what a profound book. I mean, The Boy Crisis, it's just what our society needs right now.
Thank you, yes. It took me 11 years to research and write it, and so I must say that I was constantly astounded by the things that I found that I did not know before, even though I've been engaged in the male-female issue area for 45, 50 years.
Well, and so what started you to even discover the information that you have on that path? What made you interested in that?
I was doing my doctorate in political science, and the women's movement surfaced, and in the late 60s this is, and it just, my mom had committed suicide, and I had seen her go through depression and come a little bit out of the depression when she did work, and that having the meaningfulness of work and was really helpful to her, and so I became very sensitive to the importance of some type of purpose in work, and my mother having her own sense of ability to not have to ask my father for everything monetarily. And so I think that made me especially aware of the importance of the women's movement, and a little bit shocked that that people were sort of dismissing it and not understanding. Instead of listening to women, they were oftentimes in those years calling them bra burners or dykes, and dykes was not a positive word in those years, and nor is it positive today. But at least the whole community of fluid sexuality and gender issues is much more resonant and accepting with us today. And so I was fighting about that, and I had students at Rutgers University where I was teaching. I had them role play the feminists and role play the people who were opposed to the feminists, and then I'd have them reverse roles. And they would say to me, "My goodness, your ability to get us to walk a mile in each other's moccasins, this is really healthy, and this is really good, and this is really teaching us a lot, and you should do more in this area." So I ended up, long story short, giving up my doctoral dissertation in political science and changing it into the politics of the women's movement and their impact on men's attitudes, and that led to my being on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City and speaking around the world supporting feminism. And then in the 70s and late 70s, early 80s, I began to see a large number of divorces and children of divorce not growing up very effectively. And so I started to examine that and found that the children who had a lot of father involvement were significantly better than children who didn't. So I brought this up to my colleagues on the board of NOW, but they were dealing with the fact that many people were, many of their feminist members were saying that if they were divorced, that they wanted the option to raise the children the way they felt fit. And so that was coming into, and they didn't feel, they felt that if they said that women and men, mothers and fathers, should have equal involvement with children, that they would lose membership and lose the ability, therefore, to do other good things for women. And so they were caught politically, and they finally made a political decision. And so I said, I don't feel that's the right decision. I'm sensing more and more that children need both of their parents after divorce. And so that led me to sort of develop a dual, sort of approach. One is supporting the women's movement wherever it expanded options for women, and the other one was to question it if it participated in activities that I felt were hurtful to either to children or to or demonized men or undervalued the family.
Yeah. Well, and it's so important that kids have both parents, unless there's something going on with one of the parents. And I just found in going through your book, The Boy Crisis, I was shocked to hear about some of the statistics, especially when we talk about imprisonment and suicide rates among young men, young boys.
Yes, you really see, I think, a little bit of what happens with masculinity and femininity when you see what happens at the age of 9. For example, boys and girls are very unlikely to commit suicide, and when they do, it's about equal between boys and girls. But as adolescence occurs and the combination of male hormones and social role expectations occur, we have boys now are committing suicide at the ages of 10 to 14. They commit suicide at twice the rate of girls. Between the ages of 15 and 19, it goes up to 4 times the rate of girls. Between the ages of 20 and 24, it goes to almost 6 times the rate of girls. And so we really have and we're not even, so that's terrible, of course. And if you could imagine if that was happening with girls in reverse, that we would be very upset and concerned and asking thousands of questions of ourselves as to why that is happening. But we have, the great majority of people don't even know that statistic, or the series of statistics, no less, are asking the question, why and what can we do and what is there about the way we're training our sons to become men that is taking such a sacrifice on their mental health or making them so depressed or alienated or withdrawn, or committing suicide if they don't do it physically, committing suicide indirectly by totally withdrawing into video porn and shrinking their brain and affecting their gray matter and leaving them unable to have really effective emotional relationships with boys, with girls. And so I started asking all these deeper questions. What is this all about? And so I hope that one of the better gifts of the boy crisis is just understanding how the underlying ways that we trained historically our sons to be heroes, and that there's a huge gap between heroic intelligence and health intelligence. That heroic intelligence prepared boys to be disposable in war, disposable in jobs if need be. And so heroic intelligence is the opposite of health intelligence. Heroic intelligence was intelligence to learn how to sacrifice your life to be a hero. Health intelligence is intelligence that helps you lead a longer life and a more mentally balanced life. And but it was not part of what we trained our boys to be in the past, to have health intelligence and to have emotional intelligence. We taught them that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, not when the going gets tough, the tough tune into whether they can push to their edge and get going, or whether they need to tune in and stop going and consider their feelings. Not having them pay attention to their feelings allows the firefighter to rush in and put out the fire, even if he's going to make himself get killed in the process. It was functional to the family he was saving to not be in touch with his feelings. But if he's our son, we care that we're attending his funeral rather than having him live and be part of the family that we hope raised him for.
Yeah. Well, it's very obvious that you're the perfect person to bring this information to light now with all the research that you've done, and this has been a topic that you've been very passionate about for some time. I've seen your TED Talk that you did a couple of years ago, and it was so moving. And then to also have the book, The Boy Crisis, as well, kind of just puts everything together as a society. We need to start making some major changes. Otherwise, I know you talk about this as well, that, we're positioning these young boys to feel that isolation, to feel, that they're kind of separate. And then we start having issues like we did at Sandy Hook.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. And one of the things that sort of got me tuned into this was, sort of seeing, at first by coincidence, because I wasn't looking for this, seeing how many ISIS supporters came from families where they did not have fathers, and then seeing how many school shooters came from families where there was either a divorce and there was minimal father involvement, and then seeing that the mass shooters were often in that type of situation as well. And seeing how, and then just thinking to myself, how sad for the shooters, how sad for the ISIS members, but also how sad for everyone killed by ISIS and killed in the school shootings and killed in the mass shootings. And especially when you magnify the damage, I started to see that when testosterone is very powerful, and when it's well channeled by a good father-mother relationship with a child in a stable family, or even a divorce where there's equal amounts of father involvement and father and mother involvement, and both father and mother are living close to each other, and when there's no bad-mouthing, and when there's consistent couples communication counseling, when those four things, what I call the four must-dos, when they happen after divorce, children, boys and girls, have a reasonable chance of doing well and not becoming the school shooters or dropping out of schools or the depressed or the suicidal. And so there are significant solutions to this, but the cost to us as a society, the $1 trillion+ that we spent since 9/11 on homeland security, the billions and probably trillions of dollars we spend on prisons, to say nothing of the crimes, the psychological costs and the physical deaths of crimes, and of course the ability to commit those crimes is magnified by sick people when they have the easy availability of guns. And so when you put all of that together, we are the cost for society of doing more to involve our children with their fathers and to make being a father a new type of warrior, a new type of hero. That is where we need to go with this. And I started hundreds of men's groups, and one day I came up to, I talk about this in the Boy Crisis book, and I had been writing for Ms. Magazine, the feminist publication, and we were having a celebration, a party to celebrate Mrs. involvement, existence. And some guy comes up to me and says, are you Warren-Farrell? And I said, yes, I am. And he goes, well, I just want you to know I joined a men's group that you started, and it had a huge impact on my life. And I said, no, well, how so? And he goes, well, I took off 5 years to raise my son because I had such a hole in my heart about not having done that previously with my first son, and that led to a divorce. And I said, wow, that's really quite an amazing commitment. And he said, I said, are you glad you made that? And he said, yeah, I'm glad I made that. It was the best decision I've ever made in my life. And at that point, this was back in the 70s, and I had just come back from my first book tour in 75 and 76, and somebody walks up, and I had been on TV a lot, and somebody walks up and asks for a signature autograph. And I excuse myself and reach up, and the guy looks really awkward, and I say to myself, what's happening here? I say to him, what's happening here? And he goes, well, actually, I was sure I would love an autograph from you, but actually I was really asking for an autograph from John. And I go, oh, all right. And I had not been watching TV and didn't have a TV most of those last 20 years. And so I said to him, after he signed the autograph very quickly, I said to him, well, who are you? And, you must be well known. And he sort of smiled and said, I'm John. And I said, yeah, I know you're John, but John who? And he goes, John Lennon. And so I was this, ignorant that I didn't even know this was him that I was talking to for the last hour. But he felt so, but his desire for him to call his raising of Sean the best decision of his life, given what incredible a life he had, gives you the sense of the numbers of men out there that really want to be more involved with their children. When the Pew Research Foundation asked that question directly of men for the first time a few years ago, 49% of men who were working full-time, so they already had full-time jobs, they said they would prefer to be involved full-time with their children. And when men like that are involved with their children, and mothers are also involved about equally, that's when you have it's very rare to have a school shooting, a Sandy Hook, a mass murder, or a recruit for ISIS be involved in that process.
Yeah, because the dads are there and they're involved in doing things with their children. And I know you talk. It seems like we have this culture where there's this disproportionate amount of time that dads do spend with their boys, because they feel this compelled to, they're working a lot and have a lot going on as far as that's concerned. But I think it's so great that we're having this conversation so that, fathers can kind of reassess where they're at in their lives, especially where their children are at, and make those shifts.
Yes, absolutely. It's testosterone is this enormous, force, and you have, it comes up in boys' lives, and when it's channeled well, it's so constructive, and when it's, it leads to the Steve Jobs and the Zuckerbergs and our iPhones and the inventions and the following through of those inventions, and it leads to a lot of good fathers and good men. But when it's channeled, so it's probably one of the world's most constructive forces when channeled well. When channeled badly or not channeled at all, it becomes purposeless and withdrawn and depression. It leads to depression and suicide, and also becomes the world's most destructive forces. The serial killers, all the shootings that we were just talking about. That's the price of not channeling it well. And there's so much of a lack of understanding of how there's two fundamental forms of love, mom love and dad style love. And those forms of love are extremely different. And if they're not in checks and balances mode, if there's if there's just dad or just mom, the child misses a huge amount. So, for example, dads are far more likely to roughhouse, far more likely to tease the children, far more likely to encourage the children to go to get up on the ski slope and try again, far more likely to not feel good about the child just saying, I have a teacher I don't like, therefore please get me another teacher, but say to the child, no, you have a teacher you don't like. In life you'll have lots of people you don't like. You need to go ahead and learn to get along with the people that you don't like. And the mother feels that's insensitive, and the father feels, no, that's crucial for life. What's the right answer? The right answer is both the mother and the father having the discussion about that and reaching a balanced conclusion that takes both of their perspectives into account. And usually the result of that is a child that's brought up in a much more balanced way.
Now, how does all of this affect the mental health of young boys?
Enormously. The fundamental understanding is that masculinity traditionally is not about mental health. It's about sacrificing your mental health so that others can live and be protected. So when you train a boy, historically speaking, when we brought up boys, we trained boys to be the warriors And so therefore, that saying that I mentioned before, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, that's not about mental health. That's about the opposite of mental health. That's about preparation of yourself for a short life and to not consider your feelings, to disconnect from your feelings. Every man who's successful at work learns that his success comes to the degree that he can repress his feelings, not express his feelings. That if he expresses his feelings at work and says, "Gee, I've had a tough day. I had a fight with an argument with my wife last night," or my son is, or I just am not feeling like I can do this job effectively. That people sort of may listen to him for, other men will listen to him for about 30 seconds, and they will then glaze over, and sort of the next time a discussion of a promotion comes up, it's sort of like, maybe Jim is not really up for it. I think maybe we should go to, Jill or Jane or Bill or Bob. And so he learns that sharing his vulnerabilities only increases his vulnerability, that if he goes home demoted rather than promoted, his wife will feel less loving toward him because she will not feel as protected by him. She will not feel as respectful of him. And it's very difficult for women to love men they don't respect. And so men see, but they are not able to articulate this connection between their sharing of vulnerability and their not being loved. And so there's very little permission, even today, for men, the type of men that we respect, the heroes, the warriors, the CEOs, those men that the celebrities that are held up, and the football players are not known for. The cheerleaders don't go, 1st and 10, express your feelings again. They tend to go 1st and 10 implicitly, get risk a concussion again. And so when he gets a concussion, we feel badly for him, but then we go back and cheer for the man to do the things that got the concussion. And so we have so many thousands of things about our everyday behavior. I've talked to lots of boys who grew up when they remembering that football game where they caught their first catch that led to them gaining significant yards at an important time or scoring a touchdown. And they saw how girls in their class became more attracted to them. They saw how their dad would say, "Hey, that's my son there that caught that pass." And I remember one boy saying to me, it wasn't until about 10 years after I graduated from high school and I had messed up my back playing football in college, and that my brother and I had a heart-to-heart talk, and he said, Dad was, whenever you did really well in the football field, Dad was sort of telling everybody that he was your father, but he never mentioned that he was also my father, and I was standing next to him just observing, that I wasn't being I didn't feel like I was as loved by Dad because you were the one that was the great performer. And so many boys have this feeling, but they are never able to express it. And this boy, this guy that told me this, said that my brother said when I messed up my back, he said he felt ashamed of saying this, but when I messed up my back, he actually felt, well, now maybe I can maybe I have some way of being loved and cared for. Because it won't be always, Jim, I forget what the guy's name was, who is always getting all the attention.
Yeah, it's just got to be so hard for young boys and for fathers, when it comes to just how much emotion do they show and what's okay, because it seems like that is kind of an ever elusive thing, as soon as we come to one standpoint as a society, it feels like we're moving the finish line on that.
Absolutely. And, we really have to understand, one of the things I hope that I make clear in the boy crisis is the degree to which men's weakness is our facade of strength. And you see this, and this is not, your point about it not being easy to change is, here's how challenging this is. Whether among insects or birds or animals like elks, the process is the same. The male that gets to reproduce with the female is the one that has the greatest facade of strength. And so it seems on the outside that really means not a facade of strength, but actually is strength. So, for example, with the buck elk, the buck elk that gets to do 85% of the reproduction is the one that has the biggest antlers. Those are the ones that the females seek out to reproduce with. And so it seems like that buck elk is the genetically most superior elk, and in some ways he is. But what's actually happening is that in order to grow those antlers, that buck elk has to exhaust 30% of it, use 30% of its calcium, minerals, and other nutrients. And so it is extremely weak on the inside in order to have that facade of strength on the outside. The second that the reproduction season or the rutting season is over, that buck elk immediately has to get rid of the antlers until the next rutting season or mating season. And so but if it doesn't get rid of those antlers immediately, its internal weakness is so great that it can die by the time the winter comes. And if the winter comes too soon, it's a dead animal. And so so on the outside, that buck elk and almost every other male of every other species seems to be is very appealing to women. It gains the respect of other males. Among humans, the parents are proud of the elk. That my son has the largest antlers, so to speak, and yet almost none of us see the underlying weakness that is behind that. And that's where, that's what we need to have questioned. But the types of things that are happening that used to create purpose for boys, being that warrior, or being the future CEO and climbing the ladder the most quickly, those things are no longer the definitions of sense of purpose, because a much smaller percentage of the young male population is needed to be warriors. And among the sole breadwinners is no longer a definition of masculinity, because many more women are doing the breadwinning. And so there's this huge, what I call in the Boy Crisis book, there's this huge purpose void. And when a boy doesn't have a dad, he doesn't know how to develop new senses of purpose that are appropriate for his personality and his way of and his set of preferences in the world. He doesn't even know how to define what his preferences are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just astounding, these differences. And especially when we look at like our millennial generation that we have now, what fulfills them seems to be a lot different than what it was 40 years ago when my dad was in the Marines. I mean, it was very different roles that happened then.
Absolutely. And, we'll still need our Marines and our traditional males. And so the job of dads is not to prevent our sons from becoming the Marine or the traditional male, but is rather to help our son discover himself. And, of course, the process for moms is that way, too. And moms almost always are wonderful at nurturing and paying attention and connecting with the child and providing a sort of an open space for the child for the boy to speak up and say what his feelings are, even if those feelings are feelings of weakness, because boys who express feelings of weakness to their mother, the mother is biologically programmed to protect and nurture that boy, even to express his weakness, even as she is not biologically programmed to protect an adult male who similarly expresses weakness. But for boys, she is, and so that gives the boys a chance to open up and say who they are. And at the same time, he needs to be encouraged to do things that take risks and that try new things and experiment and explore. And so when the father and mother are working together, the boy gets the best of that world. But when you have an era where there's a purpose void that the boy doesn't feel like becoming, because your dad was a Marine, therefore the only way he'll be loved is if he becomes a Marine, which often was true in previous Marine families. But the thoughtful new father will say, I'll be proud of you if you become a Marine, but I also want you to discover who you are. But discovering who you are doesn't mean doing anything you want to do whenever you want to do it. We still have a motto in this family that you exist, therefore you serve, not that you exist, therefore you deserve. So in order to be able to implement that serving as a mature male, you are not going to, in this family, learn that you can do whatever you wish to do. Here are your obligations. Here's your responsibilities. Here's what you need to. Here's why you can't bring electronics to the table. And even if you disagree, there's no electronics at the table. Here's why you can't just go off and watch video games or video porn whenever you want, before you do your homework, before you do your chores, and here's why it's going to be limited. And if you cry or complain, you can start paying your own rent. And so Dad's propensity to be willing to put that Marine-like boundary enforcement down then gives the boy the ability to succeed at doing whatever he or she wants to do. If they don't have that boundary enforcement, whether that boy wants to become an artist or become a Marine, he's often unable to do it because he cannot complete the tasks that are necessary to be successful. And so that's what, dads tend to be very good at not only setting boundaries, which moms are also good at, but enforcing boundaries where there's a huge gap between dads and moms on that issue. And children that don't have boundaries well enforced are almost always unable to achieve whatever they want to achieve and not become their unique selves. And so that usually happens most effectively when dads and moms are in an equal checks and balance mode with each other, where both the mom style of parenting and the father style of parenting are in proper tension with each other, so that children get the best of both worlds, and they also see their parents compromising in terms of raising them, but be equally involved and caring equally.
Well, you touched on something, and I do want to ask you some questions in regards to marriage in a minute, but you touched on something in regards to just education itself. And I know in your book you talk about how the feminization of education has had a huge impact on boys.
Yes. First of all, a lot of the feminization of education is good. It is important for boys to be able to sit down and pay attention and not just always be, catered to for just doing what they want to do when they want to do it. On the other hand, the education schools need to learn, and that boys that recess, for example, and physical activity is extremely important to boys. Boys' biological system requires more movement, physical activity, and girls who get involved with physical activity, such as recess, we now know that the brain develops more creatively and actually develops more quickly and effectively with physical activity such as recess than it does by studying. And so, and that protecting kids during recess or physical activity, overprotecting them, like not letting them play tag because somebody might get hurt, or not letting them play basketball, and being extremely protective, having all the rules of the game be so conscribed that kids aren't allowed to go out and just pick up, do what used to be called pickup games, and those types of things. When too constrained and too protected, the children are become much less effective in the world, and so it's important to allow, to be to be attentive to bullying, but also to sort of talk to both the bully and the bullied as if they are both as if they both have similar challenges. It's oftentimes the bully and the bullied that similarly has low self-esteem, that similarly has very challenging social problems, just do not feel emotionally intelligent. And so having them both walk a mile in each other's moccasins and hear each other's perspective, let's treat both the bully and the bullied and the and boys as somebody who is worthy of our empathy and worthy of being worked with, rather than treat one as the villain and one as the victim. So the feminization of schools has tended to overprotect girls and leave boys who are not taking risks, not exploring, not being physical, be more rewarded. And so the impact of that is just extremely powerful. We see that when reading tests, which are more subjective, are graded by teachers, that when the teacher believes that a female wrote the test, the writing test about reading, things that they've read, that the teacher ranks the test, gives the test a 30% higher grade than when the teacher thinks that the test was written by a boy. And so many stories that I hear from both parents and boys who are a little bit older and looking back are about how comments from teachers that boys are just in charge of the males have privilege, boys are in charge of things, that they just get the feeling over and over again that they really don't like boys, that really accept boys who behave like girls. And that is something we need to re-examine, because when boys are 70% more likely to today to say that they feel teachers don't like them than they did, I think it's about 15 or 20 years ago.
That's just astounding that would even be happening. And I wonder if the teachers are even aware that they're doing that. They must not be.
I think almost every teacher is well intended and wants to do what's best. And as somebody who's been a teacher, I recognize that you have a class of 30 kids. There's a real bias that I have to that class being attentive and sitting and paying attention and being in order, because it's much easier for me to communicate when everyone is attentively listening, and the girls are more likely to do that than the boys are. So I think that's a bias of having a large class, especially a bias of having a large class. So I think, but I think it's, it really needs to be re-examined. We used to have to teach 40, 50 years ago. We had to teach our female and male teachers to pay more attention to encourage girls to raise their hand, to pay attention to their stories and to speak up, and not just, sort of call more quickly on boys. And we had to, redo our tests so that they had examples that girls could identify with to a greater degree. And so we had a lot of work to do. But 40, 50 years ago, when girls weren't doing as well in school, we said, what is the matter with our schools? How can we change this? But today, when boys are doing much worse in schools in every academic area, especially in math and science, especially in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of success, and where this is happening in all 63 developed nations, where boys are falling significantly behind girls in all academic areas, we are not saying, what can our schools do differently? For the most part, we're saying, what's the matter with our boys? And that's a legitimate question to ask, what's the matter with our boys? But we also have to ask the question, what can our schools do differently? And so, for example, in Japan, one of the answers to that question is that we need to have a much bigger vocational track, whereas in the United States we've reduced the opportunities for vocational education. So in Japan, 25% of boys and girls, both sexes, are in vocational education. When they graduate, 99.6% of those that graduate from the vocational education track receive jobs. 99.6% receive jobs. When you have a job, having a job and being employed is one of the greatest predictors of happiness and feeling productive, having a sense of purpose. It is what, when you're a guy, who does not have a job. It's very rare for women to fall in love with guys reading The Boy Crisis in the unemployment line.
Yeah, because it's just how the dynamics are set up, and it's interesting. It's almost like young boys are in some ways kind of set up to fail, and if we catch this ahead of time, start working on this now, we can avert this.
Absolutely, and the price of not paying attention to it is, we end up with boys who are not worthy of our daughter's love. I have 2 daughters. John Gray has 3. We want our daughters to have good men. Failures to launch are not our aspiration for our daughters, and so it really requires. And the wonderful thing about this is, that fathers all over the world, fathers' rights groups, they don't want the right to children. They want the children to have the right to them, and they are, even when they're still paying child support, they're fighting to be more involved with their children. That should not have to be a fight. We should not be living in a world where women have the right to children and men have to fight for children. We should be living in a world where the man who fights to be with his children should be like, you want to be with the children more? Please. We admire you and respect you for contributing to that child's success, both boys and girls. And I've been emphasizing boys because the book is The Boy Crisis, but this is also true with girls. Girls who do not have a significant amount of father involvement are, for example, much more likely to be sexual before they want to be, because they fear that they will lose the boy, because they don't know enough about boys to know that boys care about something more than sex. They do care about sex, but they also want a girl's love, and boys are far more likely to be depressed and have mental health problems when they lose a relationship than girls are.
That's amazing. Well, and, to kind of switch topics here a little bit,
Sure.
So I know we've got a little bit more time. I mean, we could talk for hours. My goodness, you're such a wealth of information. My goodness. So when we talk about marriage, and you talk about marriage in your book, about how marriages in countries that succeed often fail, and I just found that to be just astounding, and would love for you to kind of expand on that.
Yes, and this is important because, many parents feel like, gee, my son is a failure to launch, even if they dare say those words. My son is, depressed, withdrawn, not doing well, not motivated. What's the matter with him? What have I done wrong? Is there underlying feeling and fear? And so I want parents to know this is not you doing something wrong. That in the end, when I started to research this, I discovered that in all 63 developed nations, boys are having significant problems in relation to what they used to have. Their IQs are falling in relation to what they used to have. They're doing worse than girls in every single academic area, worse socially, worse psychologically, worse in terms of physical health. So this is not about you. What it is about is that one of the things that it's about is that in developed nations, what developed nations have in common is enough mastery of survival to be able to loosen its laws to allow permission for its citizens to be able to have a divorce, which is perfectly fine as far as that goes. But when you have divorce, the way we've been treating divorce, children are much less likely after divorce to have a significant amount of father involvement. And that is where the problem comes in. The countries, when they don't have the father involvement that's significant, that leads to what I discovered to be more than 70 significant problems that happen for our boys, and a good percentage of those problems happen for our daughters as well. It's just that the boys without fathers are boys without a role model. And if a boy's father is doing something like divorced and not able to see him and living in a small apartment somewhere, and the boy looks at his future and sees do I want to have children? Do I want to be married? I don't, and this is what's going to happen to me. That's not a role model he wants to foresee for himself. It doesn't inspire him to become a man, and it makes him almost have like an unconscious wisdom to escape from masculinity and just play his video games because, what's the value of succeeding? And so this is the in all societies where there's the luxury of divorce, there tends to be less father involvement, and among the 10 significant causes of the boy crisis, even though lack of father involvement is only one of the 10 causes, it is probably the single most, not probably, it is by far the single most potent cause.
Yeah. Well, and do you think that also with young boys, without having that role model, they just don't know how to be, how that men should look or should act or what they should be doing?
Yes, exactly. And when it comes to girls, for the boys that are heterosexual, they consider, well, I'm really feeling attracted to this girl. But the girl that I'm feeling attracted to, the only ones that she's attracted to are the ones that are succeeding, the football players, the best basketball players, the guy that's the student body president, somebody that is walking around very confidently, the guy that's getting straight A's and, that type of thing, or, just a tall, well-rounded personality. And he's saying, I'm doing poorly in school. I'm not really great at any sport that, girls will admire me for. And so I'm sort of, he's getting a little down on himself because he's feeling like, he feels less mature than the average girl, which on average boys are less mature than the average girl at the age of 14 or so. And so he's fearing taking sexual initiatives with a girl that's more mature than he, who's only attracted to the guys that are that have their act completely together. He doesn't have his act completely together, so he's shrinking like a violet for fear of rejection, which is in fact a realistic fear. And so he then begins to say, okay, I'll withdraw into video games and just be satisfied with my video game friends. And then he becomes more and more withdrawn, more and more depressed. And then as he gets to feel feelings, sexual feelings, he begins to turn to video porn. The more he turns to video porn, the more the gray matter in his brain deteriorates. The more he has increased. The only time his dopamine increases is when the girl in the porn takes greater and greater risks. It gets harder and harder for him to turn on. When he finally does have a chance to get together with a girl, he's beginning to only turn on when the girl and he do things that are much more risk-taking, and the girl feels like she's a sex object rather than a real human being who he gets turned on by just sharing comments with and hearing each other's feelings and cuddling and being together. She feels so objectified that she gets turned off to him. Then he doesn't get a response to his next phone call, which makes him go more into the porn, and you get the cycle. And so that's the dilemma.
It just seems to spiral downward from there, and it seems like there's almost no way out.
Exactly, and the way out for the boy is oftentimes, now we've come in our interview full circle. We started out talking about suicide, and so, sometimes the way out is suicide, or people think of school shootings, or joining ISIS. We think of that as homicide. Yes, it is homicide, but it's also every time a boy does a school shooting or joins ISIS or does something destructive like that, it is not just a suicide, but it's also a homicide because he is. It's not just a homicide; it's also a suicide because he's basically either killing himself directly or allowing his life to effectively be ended right there.
Yeah. We've had a couple guests on the show that one was a parent from Sandy Hook and one was a teacher. And
wow.
Just hearing what they went through. And, it's heartbreak for everybody. And so I think it's so appropriate that your book, The Boy Crisis, is available to us now because, so many people are looking for ways, what's the problem and how do we overcome this?
Yes, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Marianne, because one of the things I really wanted to be clear about in the book is I literally was committed to not having a single problem that we don't have, that I didn't create a really clear solution for. Mm-hmm. And for me, the solution had to, in most cases, include 3 levels of solutions. Levels of solutions for parents, levels of solutions for schools, and levels of solutions for policymakers, because we really all need to be on this, we need to coordinate our efforts on this level. Otherwise, we are really going to be, the implications are both for our children psychologically, but they're also for our children being effective in a global economy, the United States partaking in world leadership in an effective way and in a constructive way, and our school systems being able to serve our sons as well as our daughters.
Well, and I like how you talked about earlier also about, how fathers, when a divorce does happen, that it shouldn't be as hard as it is for fathers to have joint custody of their children.
Yes, we really have to. There's 4 things that I brushed over these briefly before, but there's 4 things that my research has found that really need to happen if we want our children to have a reasonably good chance of being having as good a life as they would have in an intact family. And the first is approximately an equal amount of time with mother and father. Second is making sure that the mother and father live within close enough to each other, usually about 20 minutes by driving, so that the children do not have to give up activities or friends in order to see the other parent. And when they do, they start resenting seeing the other parent, and they don't have stability of the sports they're involved in, or they aren't able to go to a friend's birthday, and the friend feels disconnected from them, and so on. Third, that their child is not able to detect any bad-mouthing from dad to mom or mom to dad. And bad-mouthing includes not just words, but also rolling of the eyes or disconnecting emotionally from a child that speaks well of its father or its mother. So bad-mouthing includes encompasses all of that. And then fourth, that the parents are involved in counseling, not just when there's an emergency, but of consistent counseling, of it ideally once every couple of weeks or week, but at the very minimal, at least once a month, when there are not emergencies, so that they're planning together, even when they're apart. On the opposite end of the spectrum, with moms today, 53% of moms in the United States have children if they're under 30 without being married. The marriage issue per se is not an issue for me, but what is an issue is that when children are born to moms that are not married, within 2 years, 40% of those children have almost no contact with their father, and usually, and children that don't have contact with their father after a couple of years are subject to all 70 of the problems that I was referring to briefly. And so we really need to sort of say, yes, freedom of choice is so important, but when we make a choice to have a child, then it's our responsibility to discover what a child needs. We give up the choices of freedom once we bring someone else into the world. Then it's our obligation to find out what to get our act together and find out what do we know about that leads to our children becoming the most effective, loving, and caring children possible. And that may mean giving up some of our freedoms like our parents did and our grandparents did in order to raise the next generation effectively.
Well, that's kind of almost an expected thing in some ways is, to parent well, there are some things that we have to get, to give, because there's so much in return that we get when we spend time with our children. we are just almost out of time, Warren. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your book, The Boy Crisis?
Yes, they can either just check out warren-farrell.com. That's Warren and then Farrell is F as in Frank, ARRELL.com. Or if they want, and on that website, on the home page is my email. I'm really good at responding to emails. Alternatively, they can, if they want to get a copy of the Boy Crisis book, I'm just doing Boy Crisis in Amazon, and it's pre-ordered now. Unfortunately, if you do order it before its March 13th publication date, it's much less expensive than it probably will be then. So you at least get $11 off the retail price, and so hopefully that will be a little bit helpful.
Yes, of course. And, it doesn't matter if you have children at home, people with children. I mean, this is about our society and how we can make shifts in our society. So I feel this book is just perfect for everybody. It's not limited to parents or teachers or any kind of people in politics. Thank you so much, Warren, for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
I really appreciate, Marianne, how carefully and thoughtfully you selected your questions, how you created the setup and the lead-in, and then listened so wonderfully. Having moments with Marianne has been just a total pleasure for me.
Oh, thank you for your kind words, Dr. Farrell. It really touches my heart, and I'm so glad we got to spend this time with you. If you are looking for more information on Dr. Warren Farrell, you can visit his website at warren-farrell.com to learn more about his book, The Boy Crisis, and his other books, and also to be part of his community. We're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.